Patrick and I are here to discuss a couple things. Image stabilization, why we use the FX30, and I also wanted to make a little note about my ZV-E10 Mark II review, which is using the same sensor as the FX30. This came about because I updated the Alpha 1 finally to the new firmware, and we were giving it a whirl. We took it on, I took it on the last two studio tours. One that was shot by somebody else because you were injured.
Yep.
And then most recently the Blacktail one that you shot.
Yep.
And I wanted to see, because the Alpha 1 has a lot of allure to me. You know,
Yeah.
I like this kind of like shooting with a screen like this. The image quality is superior to that combo.
Yep.
Should be for the price difference. Really fast sensor when you set it to 4K mode. Nothing but upside. But I was noticing the results were different than the results from when we shoot FX30 when it comes to stabilization.
Here's the thing. Gerald likes to come 10 minutes before we start a studio tour and say, hey, I got this $8,000 camera.
Check this out.
Can we try and use this thing instead? And I'm just like, what is wrong with the FX30?
Did we mention, this is the Alpha 1. If we didn't mention Alpha 1 and the 16 to 25.
16 to 25.
I think that was the other reason why it was prompted, was that Sony made this new 16 to 25 2.8. And I was like, we're normally using the 10 to 20 over here.
Yep.
This will get us in a similar wheelhouse.
It's image stabilization that is the biggest difference between these two. Like,
Yes.
Image quality, this is a better camera. Like, I completely agree. Not to say this has bad image quality. I use this for nearly everything. And with the right lenses on it, I mean, this isn't the best optics lens either.
This
right?
package, this APS-C sensor mixed with an f4 10 to 20 lens, it doesn't look as good as shooting 20 mil at f2 on an Alpha 1. Like, it's not the same image.
But this combo, what we found is the image stabilization is honestly pretty stellar for a Sony body, which I think in the market and in the conversation always says, well, Sony doesn't have good IBIS, right? And I've always said, well, I shoot on the FX30 and it looks great. We shoot the studio tours with it and there's never been a major complaint about it.
It does feel like a standout from the lineup.
Absolutely.
Because this one, I wouldn't say necessarily performs worse than other full frames. All the Sony full frames are kind of like, you put them in standard and they don't have any weirdness, but they're kind of shaky.
Yeah.
So you'll have other brands that are like, look, we don't have any shakes, but they're warping, they're all crazy, right?
Yeah.
Canon had that problem for a while.
Even Lumix had it for a little bit.
Lumix's full frames have the problem. So Lumix kind of has a similar thing to this, where they have a big body, but they have a micro four thirds sensor in there, and it is the most stable option available.
Yeah.
This feels like somewhere in between. For comparison, and maybe we can actually show some samples of this. This one went from to terrible.
Yeah, like really bad.
The terrible one was we tried putting this in APS-C mode and putting the 10 to 20 on to see if we could equalize with the lens. Do not do that. This camera in APS-C mode with active stabilization was like the worst thing I've ever seen in my life.
Which is funny because our hypothesis was totally the opposite.
Yeah.
We're like, if we put the 10 to 20 on this in APS-C, it should be just as good.
Should be the same. It'll be the same.
Yeah.
It
was
wasn't.
like
So don't do
much
that.
worse.
So then you're shooting full frame. Maybe you've got this lens at 16 mil. You can do it in standard.
Yeah.
Standard didn't have any of the issues that I had a problem with the last two tours, but it's quite shaky.
Yeah, you have to be okay with that, like a natural shake, right? Where, you're getting a little bit of micro jitters, there's a bit of movement to it, which there's something to be said actually feels more natural and more like, I don't know what the word is, maybe authentic to the artificial feeling of the active stabilization trying to overcompensate for those little movements.
Maybe for a specific shot, but you wouldn't want to do a 25-minute tour.
No.
It's a bit too shaky for that, is what I found. Then when you put it in active, when you put the Alpha 1 in active, you're not bothered by the shakes as much.
No.
But then what happens, the one that's been bothering me the most, and I was able to recreate it a couple times, the Alpha 1 has this weird thing, and I think maybe I think we noticed it with the A9 Mark III as well. One, it fights you. So you're trying to like pan, you'll get a bit of like a whoop, whoop, whoop kind of fighting. Yeah. But the other one that's doing, the weird thing I noticed is this rotational thing where if Patrick does something where he kind of zooms in like this and then comes back, the camera will kind of stay
over.
Like on an angle. You're Dutch,
Absolutely.
Right? Until you maybe do something like this.
And it like reshakes itself back to level. Yeah.
Where the FX30, no matter what we did, it always came back to level.
Yeah.
And that was the most offensive weirdness I found of this one, was that thing where sometimes you would just adjust your position and my whole scene would wobble on this axis, which is strange. Other than that, it's okay. It's okay.
I think one of the frustrating parts as the shooter that's using it is I don't see any of that while I'm actually capturing.
Not at all.
Right? Because I would be compensating for it and trying to mitigate it. But it's something you can't even mitigate on a monitor. I didn't even think even a 5-inch on top isn't enough to see it. It's when you get it blown up and you're watching on your computer, that's when you see all these artifacts and these issues sort of arise, which
100%.
is frustrating.
So then we did this one. We did the same run. We started with it on standard. And again, a little bit shaky, but whatever you want to call it, the natural look.
Yeah.
The natural look is superior on the FX30 than it is on the full frame cameras. And then when you put the active on, all it does is like make it easier to watch.
Absolutely.
It just smooths it out. And when we did the same kind of thing with this on the FX30, it still let you do your rotations and then come back to center. It didn't try to fight you so much that it made the whole world seem like you were like on a boat getting rocked or whatever. It doesn't fight you.
No.
It assists.
Yeah, it assists. Yeah.
And unfortunately, even if you shoot this one in standard and then stabilize it in post, you don't get the same result that you get from active on this one, which feels like a smoothed out organic versus a warped up shake.
Totally.
Because then you'd need to have your shutter speed way up to compensate, because you still get the issue where if you have too much shake, because the physical mechanism isn't compensating as much, then what you get is this weird thing where the camera is straight, but then objects in the frame are motion blurring, which is trippy too.
Which there's gonna be a lot of people bring up probably in the comments. Well, what about catalyst browse? You can just do it later. But then we talked about how, well, then we got to increase shutter speed.
Exactly.
It also puts a whole new wrench in your post workflow because you're gonna have to throw it through catalyst, and maybe you're doing scene by scene because you don't want to do the entire clip. And it's just
100%.
that is much more headache than saying, well, we have this camera. And this
For
seems to
cheaper,
work
too.
for cheaper. Considerably cheaper too.
It is.
And it seems to work just fine. Why are we making our lives complicated? Because look, the IQ is better out of that camera, right? But for the purpose of what we do, and maybe this is the lesson of the entire video, it's the tool for the job.
It is.
It's the tool for the job, right?
And no matter how many times I hand you some other package, the FX30 feels like, we'll accept slightly worse image quality for
better overall.
Yeah. And when we say image quality too, it's like slightly noisier, slightly just like feels a little bit less fidelity in the image, you know? And that could also be often we're just shooting in different environments and stuff too.
Yeah, we're shooting at f4. We're usually pushing 800.
Yeah, because the lens force, that's other than this lens forces you in f4.
It forces you into f4. And we're also in such mixed lighting conditions that sometimes I'm pushing even the ISO up to like 1600, which isn't great on this camera as it is. And so this sensor is really nice, but we're using probably the worst lens to show off this sensor.
Just so we can take advantage of it.
Exactly, yeah. Plus I like having the power zoom too, which is good to have.
But it does also present a unique advantage to the stabilization, which is that you get to shoot as wide as 10 mil.
Exactly.
And this is probably what Panasonic is leveraging too, is on Micro Four Thirds, you're using 7 mil lenses, 8 mil lenses.
Yeah,
they're just gonna look more stable than starting at 16. You're starting at 10 mil in a body that has a big body with a smaller sensor.
With more physics to move
mechanically.
around. I think it's strange that I don't know the science behind it or whatever the technical, but they do claim the same 5.5.
Yeah, so we looked that up to make sure it wasn't like this is a better IBIS.
Yeah.
There's not much description on the website. It says 5.5 stops, 5 axis, whatever they called it, IBIS.
With active and all that
With
stuff.
active, yeah. But there has to be something different with the actual mechanism inside.
Anybody that's shot with these cameras, I know instantly. If you pick up this, you're like, oh, this IBIS is pretty good.
Yeah.
It's like a surprise, especially because there's that connotation that Sony doesn't have the best IBIS. You start to use this one, you're like, oh, this looks pretty good.
Now, speaking of that improved mechanism in the FX30, something I didn't really touch on in my recent ZV-E10 Mark II review, where I was testing the sensor more for overheating because I said otherwise it's the same sensor as the FX30, and it is. But what is not the same, and I didn't even touch on this, is that IBIS mechanism. In fact, on the ZV-E10 Mark II, the mechanism isn't there. It's purely electronic, the stabilization. Now, I don't believe this was brought up in my briefing, and I never tested it because of that. I know the stabilization of the FX30, it's great. Move on. I didn't realize that it was missing the mechanism. So apologies for any confusion there. I know other people covered it in their videos, so thankfully that's why you should watch multiple videos on a new product. I guess I just wanted to submit that correction, that the FX30 is the same sensor as the ZV-E10 Mark II, but the FX30 has this IBIS mechanism that we're talking about right now that seems to be better than any other Sony camera's IBIS at the moment. And you can only, if we really wanted to get in the weeds, we could do a video comparing the A6700 to the FX30 IBIS. I feel like I did that before.
I have a feeling they're the same.
They're probably the same. But
and I think even to your point, like I'm not even sure this being like the FX3 body is why it's so good. I just think it's because it's a smaller sensor. Right. I just think if even the ZV-E10, what is it, Mark II?
Mark II, yeah.
Was IBIS, even in that smaller body, I just think they have more room to move around, right?
Maybe, but they do make those bodies considerably smaller.
That's true.
Which then brings me back to Panasonic again, which is they make
huge bodies.
Yeah, for a Micro Four Thirds, you'd think it would be a small camera.
it's
The
almost-
GH7 is a big
Yeah,
camera.
it's almost bigger than an S5 II.
Yeah, with a tiny little sensor. That's got plenty of room to build an IBIS mechanism around that. So,
And then just to address the other comments, like use a gimbal. We've tried using gimbals before too, and that sometimes becomes more of a hindrance because we've been getting, we have a shorthand now with the way we work together. I know where you're gonna go. You kind of know where I'm gonna follow. Where we found the gimbal is like another wrench in our system of like
you kind of gotta wait for it.
You gotta wait for it. It's got to get here. And then there's a lot of times where like, Adam Savage will grab like a little nut and bolt or something like that, and I got to get in tight in a drawer. And I can't. That gimbal was very restrictive for stuff like that. So it's
because
okay.
the shots aren't planned.
Exactly.
They're so spontaneous. This is a good answer though. If you want to spend even more, you could throw this package on a gimbal, and everything would be better. It would be smoother, better, whatever.
Absolutely.
But can you get the shot the same is the question.
There's a spontaneity to just having this, and also even when you show up at someone else's space, you're not coming in with a whole bunch of gear. It feels, a little bit more welcoming. I've noticed that even when I shoot with my phone. People are different when you have a smaller package. When you start to get a little bit crazy with your setups, it changes the vibe and the feel of the shoot. It feels a little bit more like you're on camera now. You make sure you're on camera. This feels nice and up close and personal, and it's easy.
And it works well for Patrick because Patrick's sort of a janky shooter on the Super System. He'll be like, oh, that's interesting. He like one-hands something off in the distance, or he'll be like talking to me and he's like doing a shot like this.
Absolutely.
It's like, go back and watch an FX30. What was the last FX30 studio tour we did? Probably the ones in Utah, right?
Yeah.
So like, go watch Jerry Rig. And if you see a shaky shot, it's because Patrick's probably
like
just
this,
holding it like I was
full stretch.
But yeah, so it was fun to test out the Alpha 1.
Yeah.
But I do think the FX30 bang for the buck is still
fantastic.
It's still a really, really good camera in Sony's lineup, and probably their best, from our testing, their best stabilization camera for that organic look. And you put it in active and it doesn't do anything weird as far as we can tell.
Absolutely. And you can just put a little piece of tape on it, and everyone on your productions will think you have an FX3.
Put your invoice up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anything else you want to say, Patrick?
No, let's stop putting wrenches in the studio too.
Okay. Wait till the next thing I come over there. Hey, Patrick, try this.
Yeah.